Okay, we are live, this time with Sarah Borwell joining us all the way from DC
Hello.
and this time we're talking all about sports again, but in particular tennis, because that is what Sarah is an expert in. So Sarah, thanks very much for joining us.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Great. So just to let everyone know who is watching, you can put your comments on Facebook on this live stream and we will answer them as we go. I'll be monitoring them. So feel free to ask Sarah anything about US sports admissions and tennis in particular. And don't worry, there are no silly questions, but you'll get a silly answer if it's a silly question. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about yourself. You have an English accent, but you're living in DC. So how did you get into doing what you do now?
Well, I'm originally from Middlesbrough and started tennis at a very young age, 4 or 5 years old at Tennis World. Really great club, family run, amazing coaches, loads of players. And I kind of then gravitated towards American University. Now, it was back in the days with no internet. So a lot of the times we actually didn't have a clue what we were doing. Part of me feels I long for those days where there's so much information now where you can really kind of get bogged down with it. And so me and my mum did a lot of the work. We finally got me into Rice University back in '98. I know, Jason, you're thinking, wow, you must be intelligent, Sarah, to get
I know
into
that you're intelligent.
But I got in because I was a tennis player, basically. And so I waited there for about a year and then transferred out to University of Houston, where I completed my studies and played tennis. But America kind of was life-changing for me because it allowed me to develop on the tennis court, gain confidence in my game, where I could then go pro. So I was on the pro tour for 10 years and played every Grand Slam, represented my country. But there's a lot of downtime on the tour where you're either training, competing, or sitting and doing very little. So I started helping British tennis players find the American pathway and give them an understanding of it. And by about 2010, I realized that I was actually enjoying it more than competing on the tour. So I retired, and Tennis Smart basically came about then. I've been doing it ever since.
Great. And we'll talk more about Tennis Smart in a moment, but I obviously want to talk a little bit more about your experience competing in Grand Slam. So correct me if I'm wrong, you were #1 in doubles at one point, is that right?
Yep, I was at one point I was 2 in singles, and then got to 199 in the world for singles, but tore my shoulder, and my age was creeping up, and I was starting to realize that there was probably a way for me to do better if I became a doubles specialist. So I then moved into doubles at the end, nearing the end of my career, the last 5 years, and worked with Louis Caillet, who is the reason why every British doubles player is doing so well now on the tour, because he's fantastic. So it was life-changing to meet him, and I ended up then being able to access all the top tournaments, which was nice.
Okay, that sounds great. And any particular fond memories from the time you were playing?
First off, yeah, well, Wimbledon, the first time I played there with Jane O'Donoghue, I'd literally just graduated from university. So for years before, I'd been working for IBM doing the stats. To actually be there as a tennis player the first time was amazing. And then anytime I represented Great Britain at the Fed Cup, and winning a bronze at the Commonwealth Games in Delhi, India was brilliant, because you're in the athletes village with all the other athletes. So some of all the track stars and everything, the swimmers. So to be able, and basketball players, to be around people like that while playing it was something that we'd never had access to before. So that was kind of that was right at the end of my career. So it was kind of the cherry on the top of a fun kind of experience.
Sounds amazing. And how much of a part, because you've talked about the fact that you started at Rice, how much of a part did the American training come into that success?
I think it kind of made me really. At 18, I started at 17, I started doing better. Before that, I wasn't LTA funded. I hadn't really been talent ID'd. I was a really late developer because I was in full-time school doing 10 GCSEs, 3 A levels, and my family, my mum and dad were teachers, so we didn't have the opportunity to travel and play ITFs. So I was kind of left to my own devices, which was nice because at the time, although I had a good game, I didn't believe in it. And I felt the pressure and the anxiety of playing. And so getting out of that bubble, the British bubble of where we are a little pessimistic and negative in England when you compare us to America. So I just left, and being surrounded by really positive Americans who kind of instilled in me the confidence that, well, actually, you're pretty good, like if you work hard enough. And luckily, I always had a really good work ethic and I was pretty determined. And so America is the reason why I'm successful, really, in both tennis and being able to run my own company afterwards. That's why I'm so passionate about trying to help young players find the right pathway, because without it, I probably would have gone pro at 18, quit at 22. And as much as I like coaching people, I couldn't do it as a full-time job. And that's probably what I would have gravitated towards.
And so on that note, the education that you got in the States, what did you end up majoring in while you were there?
Well, at Rice, I was doing, I was just trying to pass really at Rice. When I got to Houston, I chose the kinesiology track with marketing. So like a sports administration and marketing, which I came out with like a 3.5 GPA, but I focused more on my tennis. At Rice, I remember the first semester just trying to stay on top of my work and work until 2 a.m., just trying to kind of maintain like the level that they needed. And for me, everyone was just so intelligent there. And I soon realized I wasn't going to be able to cope and be a good tennis player and a good student at such an amazing academic school.
Okay. But still the academic training that you got while you were at Houston, that allowed you to go on and do what you do now. Is that right?
Maybe. I think the marketing side of it probably did. I was a good student because I worked hard, but I wasn't thinking, okay, I must do well in this. I chose kinesiology, sports administration. So that's probably, I didn't choose business for a reason. So it helped me be able to kind of sort through how I wanted to promote my business and all of those things. But I think it's more just the experience that I've had from being on the tour, having to go through the process myself of America. And then over the last 15 years of really kind of understanding how American university works and watching players flourish, whether they're really academic or really good at tennis, finding the right place for them. So I think so the degree probably not so much, but just the able to mature and develop and just understand that being able to speak to people and network and be personable, that gets you quite a long way in life.
Yeah, definitely. So you went pro, and then you started helping people get through this process, and that's when Tennis Smart came about. And do you want to talk a little bit more about what Tennis Smart actually does?
Yeah, it started out as simply trying to help players get to American university, because we basically have a 50% dropout rate in 15-year-olds. I was almost one of them. I wanted to quit tennis when I was kind of 14, and I told my mum, and she said, well, you've got to tell your coach tomorrow. And I was too scared to tell him. And so thankfully I continued, but with such a large dropout rate, it's mainly because you don't have a clear pathway through. So we all just thought that it was the pro tour or bust. So you have all those academic kids who think, well, what's the point putting all this energy into tennis if I'm actually not really going to go pro? My grades are more important. Or for me, I found the whole competing side of things really unpleasant. When I was a junior, I hated it. The anxiety and the stress would build up for weeks before a tournament. So for me, it was more the social side of it, which kept me going until I had the confidence. So that's kind of how I started. I figured if someone from Middlesbrough who wasn't a top junior could actually get to 65 in the world and have an amazing life on the tour for 10 years and play all the slams, there must be a lot more Sarah Borwells out there who just haven't had the chance. So that was the thinking of it, is to at least say, look, yes, you want to go pro, but you can do it at 22 if you want to. Let's get some academics behind you. And then I wrote down all of these ideas that I wanted to do, but because it's just me, it's hard to, I had like kind of a 5-year plan. And now with working with Barry Fulcher, who is kind of my age group as well, I grew up with him, a tennis player. I'm now able to do the next part of my idea, which was highlighting all the pathways. So the British University route, staying in the tennis industry, and making sure we speak to players as young as 12 and their parents and just say, look, if you want to go to America, this is what we need. This is the level you need to be at academically and for tennis. If you want to go to British University, it's amazing. If you don't want to go to university at all, you can stay in the tennis industry and you've got this. And just hopefully giving people peace of mind, knowing that if I keep playing tennis, there's actually something out there for me. And like me, I'm 41 now, and all of my mates are still involved with tennis, like Dan Kiernan at Soto Tennis Academy. You got Barry Fulcher, Jason Torpey. They're all got their little kind of bubble of being really successful, passionate about helping. And we've all continued on with our friendships. So that's kind of the sell of it, of just have options, have an understanding what's out there, and I'll support you through it, basically.
Okay, yeah, it sounds really interesting, especially with highlighting the other routes, not just America. I guess that brings us on to this idea of finding the right fit. Now, fit is obviously something we talk a lot about in American education in general, even for academic students. And you've talked about how you realized that Rice wasn't the right fit for you, and that's why you swapped. But also you've talked just now about the idea of finding the right fit path for the student. How do you go about that, and how do you work out early on with a student what is going to be the right fit for them in terms of the right college or the right pathway?
Thankfully now, when I first began, I knew nothing about the American setup. I didn't know the coaches, who was good developmentally, who would be supportive. And so when I first began, I actually didn't charge people because I wanted to I knew I couldn't offer an amazing kind of help, but the support we could at least muddle through together. So in the past 15, 20 years, I now at least can look at someone's bio and know, okay, they're a 10.2 UTR. They want to do a business degree. They're really good academically. I know that we have kind of 40 good options that we can go after. And knowing as well how in America, it's the complete opposite to the UK, where in America, you get recruited based on your tennis ability, like I did for Rice, and not your academic ability, because my academic ability was nowhere near what Rice would normally want. So for all of those players from the UK who are maybe Russell Group standard university students, very, very good academically, but tennis isn't as good, we have a very frank conversation initially, just be like, look, you're looking at Durham, Exeter, all of these top schools in the UK. We can't find that level in America because you will be recruited as a tennis player unless you go to Division 3, but then you have those problems of it's all mainly financial aid based, so it becomes more expensive. So when I first start talking to players, we kind of have these chats. And then especially now with my players on WhatsApp, I'm literally talking to them daily, finding out exactly what they want, what type of coaching style do they want, where do they want to play on the team, what degree, the location, the academics, and just making them aware that, okay, you have 6 variables which are really important to you. Location should probably be the 6th one because it's not going to change your life. It'll be nice if you're by the beach, but it's not going to help you get a job. And we figure out which is most important. Is it academics? Is it coaching? Is it the schedule? And so then as we start hearing from teams, I put those variables in order of the team, and we can kind of start narrowing down. So it's when we get to the stage of the placement, it's pretty involved. So I've got a few players right now where every single day we're kind of getting rid of one option and working on the others, and just finding the perfect fit, knowing that you might not get every box ticked, but at least it's the boxes which are going to make you happy and help you improve.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good point about kind of prioritizing what's important to them, and some of them can sometimes seem really important to them at the start, but that ultimately is not going to be the thing that gets them the best job or the best tennis coaching. What we always say to people is that you've got to think about finance first. If finance is important to you, that's probably the most important thing in your fit. If you like, you've got to find somewhere you can actually afford to go first of all, and that might mean compromising on something like location. That's interesting though. So do you also help students go to divisions that don't offer scholarships, like Division 3?
Yeah, for a long while it was mainly Division 1 and 2 and NAIA. But and I've been trying hard to contact all Division 3s just to kind of understand, because obviously some of them offer really good academic scholarships, and it brings the price to kind of 20 to 22,000 a year for a top 50 national liberal arts school, which is amazing. Or then there's others who have huge international pots of money for financial aid. And I use the Harvard pre-read calculator most of the time because it seems to be relatively accurate for the majority. So I'm trying harder to find schools for those really academic players who perhaps financial aid, we could get a large kind of sum. But I make it's tricky because it's a balance, because you don't want them to kind of get their hopes up to say, I'm going to go to Denison. And then the pre-read comes back and the family are just like, well, I can't really, 30,000 is too much for us. It's a tricky balance of getting the hopes up, but also making sure that they have the opportunities of some of the elite academic schools. When for Division 1, I know going in that I can get you a scholarship for $15,000 if you're a certain level. So I'm trying to utilize D3 more. I have a female player going to Pomona. She was due to start in August, but she's deferred for a year. Got players looking at Denison this year, Union College in New York. So trying to find the ones which offer good academic or financial aid, basically.
Okay, great. So there's an obvious question related to this, which is, how good do you have to be at tennis? Now, that's a really hard question to answer because it really depends on where you want to go and the division and things. But you mentioned earlier about having a particular UTR rating. Some students just starting out in tennis, perhaps in the UK, might be unfamiliar with that. Do you want to explain what UTR is and how it compares to the British ratings?
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with UTR. So LTA were one of the first federations to send in all of their results to the UTR. So if any British tennis player is listening, if you go to myutr.com and put in your name, you'll probably have a UTR number. So the British UTRs are relatively accurate when you compare them to college players' UTRs, which is great for a coach, because you know that if you're recruiting a 9.5 female, that they're probably going to be a 9.5 once they get there and they compete, and it's not going to drop. The problem I'm having right now is that not all countries send in results to UTR. So, or there's very small pools of players because the country's small, there's not many tennis players. So if they don't have as much data, the algorithm kind of doesn't pick through that very well. So you'll have players from different nationalities whose UTRs are inflated. And so my time right now is being spent saying, look, the data shows that ours won't drop. This country's probably will. And so it's difficult having the conversation with coaches who are perhaps saying, yeah, but I'm talking to a 10 UTR from Serbia. That's better than a 9.5. But knowing that that Serbian UTR is probably going to drop a whole UTR. So it's a great system. And I think it's helped in a way where we want players to compete on a more regular basis. And it's all level based. So instead of having to drive all the way down to London, if you're from Middlesbrough, you can play a local UTR event knowing that you're going to get level based matches, which are competitive. But the problem is if you sign up for it and you see the decimal point, people become obsessed with kind of refreshing their UTR account every day and seeing if it's gone up like a decimal point. So I think it's been a great idea, and it's helped the level base and cutting down on people having to travel for hours to play a tournament. And it also helps the fact that many girls events are cancelled because there's not enough girls playing, and with UTR you can play, boys and girls can play against one another because it's level based. So that's helpful. But there's always issues with any kind of ranking system. So I think as they do tweaks to the algorithm and improve it, then it'll continue to get better. But a long story short, if you just compete on a regular basis and choose tournaments where you can get a lot of matches in, so you don't jump up a level because you think playing better players and losing first round is beneficial, finding tournaments where you can maybe win through to the semis or win the event, that's kind of the right way to start scheduling your tournaments. And UTR gives you a glimpse of that, at least, with how to do that.
Okay, interesting. That was much more about UTR than I ever thought I would know, but that it sounds both useful and frustrating.
Yeah. You would love it, actually, because it's all the algorithm. Like, I don't understand stuff like this, algorithms and data. And I spoke to someone the other day who, well, is like you and is very good with numbers. And he was trying to explain like how the algorithms had issues and how they were good. And of course, not lasting at Rice for a year, I went over my head, but it's something that you would love, really.
I have to look into it now and see what the algorithm is like. Although if the recent grading algorithms in the UK are anything to go by, then
that's true. Yes.
Maybe it's not as accurate as it could be. Okay, so obviously one thing that you do is also provide coaching for the students for tennis. Is that right?
I do. We before COVID, I would come home to the UK every 3 months, and with Barry Fulcher of the training base, we would host tournaments or tennis training camps. The camps I've really, you have been part of them, you were amazing, where we would offer tutoring and tennis. So they would not only gain help with the entrance exam, which is as important as your UTR, but they'd also get to be on court, they'd compete, they'd learn something from a level 5 coach. So we do a lot like that as well, and they're actually going to expand in 2021, hopefully, where we will have not only the tutoring camps with the tennis, but also Matt Little, Andy Murray's fitness trainer. He's going to do a camp where he will be on court 4 hours with the players, and then on the Sunday they'll get to compete in a college style dual match. But we'll also have people who were former British and American student athletes come in and talk to them, and we'll do Zooms with British university coaches and American university coaches. So it's kind of like a Fulbright weekend, I guess, where you can go and you not only get to play and learn on court, but you can also get the facts and the information you need to make good decisions on your pathway.
Okay, yeah, it sounds really interesting. And yeah, certainly we did enjoy helping out in those other weekends, although they looked absolutely exhausting.
Yeah, a few tutors.
Loads of tutoring and also loads of tennis.
Yes, the tutors that you sent were incredible, and I made sure that they were always had enough coffee and chocolate and sandwiches, but they were yeah, they really worked that day.
Well, one of the tutors was an ex-tennis pro himself, so I think he was well aware of what students have to go through.
Yeah.
They want to cope academically and in sports as well. So
Yeah.
good when people understand their pain, I think.
Yeah, and he went to Pepperdine, didn't he?
He
So
did, yeah.
yeah, so amazing tennis player and very academic. So the players loved it when they were there. It was informative, not only from a entrance exam standpoint, but understanding what he went through to get to such a good school.
Yeah, great. And in general, if a student is thinking about going for a sports scholarship in the States, what kind of things do you think they should think about early to help them through that process?
The first thing we always want to make sure is you're doing the right GCSEs. So a lot of tennis players, they drop down to 5 GCSEs, which is the minimum that the NCAA will allow. And they've got to be in certain core subjects, so maths, English, science, social science, and then one more from that group. So if you're doing a double science, then there's the one more. The social science is what we call humanities. So that as long as they've got those 5 core subjects, then that kind of ticks the first box of what could cause us headaches further down the road. And then ideally you want to be getting grades 5 or higher. If you're getting 4s thrown in, then that really affects how much academic money you can get if your UTR's low. So whenever I'm doing presentations, I'm always kind of hitting home that you might not like school, but if you love tennis, your grades will open up different doorways for your tennis, and you'll get far more better options tennis wise if your grades are better. And so a lot of parents love to hear that, especially if their son or daughter hates maths and just doesn't want to study, but tennis is their driving force. So it really helps grades improve, I find. But so that's the first thing. And then from then just trying to compete on a regular basis. But I'm all about having a balance. Like if I hadn't had been at normal school and had a normal social life as a teenager, I don't think I would have continued with my tennis. So I always kind of press home that you don't have to do 20 hours a week of tennis. If you only want to do 10 hours, but you compete and you're doing well at school, then you just got to enjoy it really. And that's the main thing, getting out of the 15, 16-year-old range where you just have so many stresses, and getting them to A levels so that they can kind of start to cope a little bit better than that. I think that's half the battle. So GCSE grades and competing, they're kind of the main things that I really try to make clear to everyone.
And are there any, I know that in the past you've mentioned some of the restrictions on the sorts of GCSEs they have to do. In the past, there was a language requirement, wasn't there? Has that now changed?
Yeah, for the NCAA, we don't need it. I think there's odd university. I think Furman is one that I've stumbled across who did need it, whether they've changed as well. But the majority, very few of my players have a language right now. So, and there's never really an issue. The NCAA never need it, and many universities don't seem to.
Okay, great. That's good to know. But obviously, we're just talking about the minimum here. If someone wants to go to a Rice, for instance, they're going to need to prove themselves academically as well.
Yeah. So if you're looking at, like, I have players who are Arthur Ferry, who's off to Stanford this year. So not only is he kind of top 30 in the world juniors, but he's also took a very heavy academic load as well. Emily Arbuthnot just graduated from Stanford, straight A student, 4 A levels, 1300 on the SAT. So you still, well, even if you have aspirations to go there, if you're not doing a heavy workload in England, when you get there, you're going to be like me at Rice and just really feel out of sorts. So for those students who are academic, tend to be doing the 10 GCSEs anyway and looking to do 3 or 4 A levels.
Okay, that makes sense. And since you went off to America when you were a teenager, How have things changed? Do you think it's, apologies for that, there's someone at my door. Do you think that things have got harder now, or do you think it's still just as hard as it ever was?
No, I think it's probably, although it's easier in the fact that you can research places now, like back in the day when I was being recruited, like they'd literally send a media guide. So they'd mail it, and then 2 weeks later it'd get there and we'd be like, oh, this is Houston, Texas. Okay, that's what it looks like. Like we had nothing to go off at all, which actually might be a bit better, because right now there's so much information out there. You can really tie yourself in knots with US academic news, using their like rankings, knowing that it's slightly political, and size of the school and research opportunities. And then there's like the other money.com, their ranking system. So you can really kind of go down into a deep dark hole and find so many reasons of why you should go to one and why this one's not great. So I think from that aspect, right now there's a lot more information, which is harder for the players. And there's not as many schools as there were back in my day. So since COVID, we've actually lost 71 teams or more right now. And I think the trickle down effect of the financial issues is going to continue. And there's a lot more players who are aware of American university because of the opportunities of going pro afterwards. So I think there's fewer skills, more players, more information. So it's a lot harder for juniors really to just kind of navigate their way through everything.
Yeah, and is the competition higher now as well? Are people just better at tennis, and are more people applying to university?
Yeah, I like in my day, the clearinghouse for the NCAA wasn't as strict. So you'd have these pro players who would go pro, take a lot of money, realize that actually the pro tour isn't as glamorous as you think, and then they come back to university. So that's not allowed now. But everyone is seeing, especially on the men's side, they're seeing it as a platform and a springboard to the pro tour. So you are getting a lot of those elite juniors. So like an Arthur Ferry playing French Open juniors recently and everything, maybe 10 years ago, he might have gone pro, but now he's off to Stanford and will probably complete his degree there, then go pro. So you're battling with some of the very best juniors in the world now for your place, but there's still so many amazing places you can choose from, whether it's D1, 2, or 3. So there's always options out there, but you can control who you hear from by getting good grades and competing on a regular basis, basically.
Okay, so just be better overall, and then you get more.
Just try. That's just work hard and kind of. You're going to have a load of knockbacks. I had loads of knockbacks as a junior. And I remember always being told, oh, you've missed out on the funding this year and not being talent ID'd. And it was kind of the best thing that's happened to me, because I was anxious anyway. So if I'd had the funding on top of that and the worry, so just enjoy it, have a balanced life, and just never give up really. And you'll get to where you need to be.
Great tip. Okay, you just mentioned the C word, which is COVID.
I was like, oh, I let that slip.
And obviously the current situation is way more difficult than it has been in the past. So you mentioned that lots of teams have gone as a result of this. And are we going to see them coming back, or do you think this is a permanent thing?
No, it's permanent, unfortunately. But I think a lot of the time, the teams who have decided to cut certain sports, I think the athletic directors had kind of already had this in their mind for a while. And COVID was a nice opportunity to say, look, let's get rid. Because if you're 20 million in the hole and you cut your tennis team, which saves you $1 million, so there's other reasons around why teams are being cut. But the way college sports are set up financially, there's always going to be issues, just because you're so close to making errors if there is an issue like this where you are going to be struggling for cash flow. So I think next year that we're still going to see teams kind of be removed, but we're still, I think we've lost about 45 men's teams. So a lot of that is about Title IX as well, the equality of men and women, equal scholarships, and about 35 women's teams. So I think there'll be more coming, which is disappointing. So everyone's kind of worried, because I had 10 teams which are cut, and I had all of those players who were on those teams. I had to then find another team. And if you think there's now so many players in the mix trying to find other teams, and then the NCAA gave all of the players who were affected with COVID this year, they all got their year back. So all those seniors who were due to graduate, they're not. So you just there's just too many players, basically. Right. So it's a really, for fall 2021 players, it's a really tough time for them. Like, I really feel for what they're going through, just not only you having to suffer through COVID, but you can't compete, which is one thing that you can kind of at least try and control, of competing on a regular basis. So the coach sees your UTR and sees your results. And then a lot of teams are full because the seniors are staying. So it's really hard for the players. It's going to be like this really for the next few years, in terms of finding your places. So I work 7 days a week anyway, but my mind is constantly working on, okay, where can I put him, or where will she go? Are they full? Like, are they waiting on seniors? Because it's such a different kind of year for placement.
Yeah. Okay. And related to that, we've got a question here actually, which is about how can students who are thinking about going to America, how can they decide on colleges if they can't go and travel and see these colleges? What would you advise people to do to help make that decision?
Talk to me, really. Like, whenever I go through all the placement with my players, I give them every single fact they could imagine, stuff they can find online if they want to do it themselves, research everything. But I can also give you the background of the coach. Are they developmental? Are they going to coach you in a style that you like? Do they get a lot of injuries, or is it more tennis specific training there? What's the location like? Do they have internship opportunities? So there's all this information that you can't really find online, which I'll give to players. Now, in terms of visits, not all of my players before COVID visited anyway, because the whole thing about placement is about timing. And if let's say you get an offer today, the coach might say, okay, Jason, we really want you. We're going to give you a week to decide. And if I say to you, well, actually, this ticks every single box, like, you're going to make the team, it's within your budget, it's one of the best business degrees in the world, really nice coach, you've got to go for it. So even before COVID, if we find a place where it's a no-brainer, and you're scared to lose it, you might kind of just decide anyway. So it's very rare where you'll find two options which are so identical that you really aren't sure about which one. But I understand, as a parent, peace of mind of knowing exactly where your child's going to. But in terms of making the right decision for the university, you don't need a visit, really, because there's always going to be something from one team that you're not sure about, and the other one will have it. So you just got to really just talk through it over and over again until you find the right setup.
Okay, great. Okay, we've got a few classic sports scholarship questions coming in. Where one here is from a counsellor at a school in the UK. And I know that every counsellor in schools gets asked this question from students all the time. Students who aren't competing at national level, this is not just tennis, but any sport, not competing at national level, but are quite good at the school level, and they ask about what opportunities might be open to them. It's if they're not competing at national level and not even at the top of their school level, I guess you can be fairly certain they're not going to be going to the most amazing places. But what other options are open to them in that case?
Yeah, that's what, for tennis especially, there's so many different schools and there's so many different levels. So you will find a school which needs, let's say you're a female and a 10 UTRs are really, really good. But you can also find Division 3 schools where they're just looking for a 3 UTR or a 4 UTR, and that person can go into the school. Actually, I had a player who's a 2 UTR 2 years ago. She picked up tennis really late. She played at school. She really enjoyed it, liked being part of a team. So really, like, it was always her dream to go to America, but she just never really played that many tournaments. She's over here right now and she's on a team which is perfect for her and she's loving it. So for tennis especially, I'm not sure for like field hockey and soccer is probably a little bit different, but for tennis, you've got top 10 in the world all the way down to players who maybe just play a few times a week and just like being on a team and enjoy tennis. So, but for that, you're looking at Division 3, which means academically you need to be a good student, and perhaps you either need a big chunk of financial aid, which means a low household income, or you have a lot of money and paying $30,000 to go to Babson or somewhere is okay.
Great college.
Yes, I know.
We had a student applying for the baseball team there, actually.
Oh, really? Yes, I've tried a few times with the tennis there. It looks like an amazing setup. The location, especially.
Yeah. Currently advising a student who's thinking about Babson because of its proximity to the Olin College of Engineering as well.
Okay.
Great. Okay. And I mean, we've spoken a lot about sports and tennis. Is there anything about tennis or sports that we haven't covered that you feel like we should definitely have mentioned?
I don't think so. I think it's more just, I don't know. I had a few players who have come out here on tennis scholarships, and then we all tend to be good football players or soccer players, and they've actually, because soccer is a fall sport and tennis is kind of a spring sport, they actually have played both. So there's a load of opportunities if you just kind of you just got to do, as a junior, just do as much as you possibly can by working hard and getting all the information you need. But for tennis especially, it really is about competing, and that because as much as we can all say, yeah, but my UTR would be that if I competed. Well, you just got to compete, and that's hard, I know, because there's so much to do nowadays, and there's so many different jobs pulling you, but that's kind of the main thing. And I'm sure it's probably the same for soccer and field hockey and athletics. That's the first thing they're going to look at over here when they talk to you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, and well, before we finish up, Sarah, how can people get hold of you if they want some more advice?
My website is tennissmart.net. And then all my information's on there, really. So
is it Tennis Smart with 2 S's in the middle? Tennis Smart?
Yes. Do you like that?
Yeah.
That's probably the best way. And there's a lot on there now regarding I work with Cliff Drysdale Tennis Management. So for those who have no interest at university, we're connected with Cliff Drysdale, and they offer 18-month kind of placements in America where you can, you coach most days, but they're going to teach you how to manage and how to direct tennis clubs. And they're in really nice places like Key Biscayne, Florida, San Diego, California. So there's loads of different things on the website that you can have a look through as well.
Brilliant. Great. That's really useful. Okay, just to finish up, you have the dubious honor of being the last person on this Facebook Live series before the election. So am I allowed to ask you for your prediction?
Oh, God. Well, oh, gosh. I have no idea anymore I try not to watch the news because you just never know.
No, none of us know.
Just come and see me. If I'm living in England next month, then oh God.
Whichever way anyone is planning on voting, fingers crossed that it all works out well.
Yeah, I think as long as we just have a normal life without COVID, then that's Anything will seem fine after this, I think.
I think so. And we're all crossing our fingers that next year is going to go back to some sort of normality, both for US admissions and life in general.
Yes, because I'm sure your end as well, because I have a lot of players who obviously are trying to do the entrance exams. And actually that's a good thing to say with right now, the entrance exams are test optional. So a lot of universities are allowing my players to enter, and the NCAA are as well. But the state of Florida is right now the only state I've come across where they still require them. So if there's anyone who's listening and that's kind of where they want to go to, you're going to have to try and find an entrance exam from somewhere.
Great. All right, Sarah, this has been fantastic. I'm going to end the live stream now, but we can stay on and chat afterwards. But to all the listeners and people asking questions, thank you very much. And Sarah, thank you to you.
Thank you, Jason.